3 legions marched into Germania. None would return. It began with confidence, an army on the move, the iron heart of Rome echoing through the damp forests of the north. 15,000 Roman soldiers, disciplined and battle-tested, followed by several thousand auxiliaries, camp followers, traders, and slaves. Behind them, a long line of wagons groaned under the weight of supplies, weapons, and treasures bound for new provinces. To any observer, it was more than an army. It was a moving city, a living symbol of Roman order advancing into what they believed was another soon-to-be conquered land. For the Roman Empire, used to open fields, straight roads, and the structured geometry of battle, there seemed little to fear in these untamed woods. Germania was wild, yes, but not invincible, and leading the expedition was a man trusted by the emperor himself, Publius Quinctilius Varus. Varus was no fool. He was an experienced administrator, a man who had governed Africa and Syria with discipline and fairness. But his strength lay in law and governance, not in the ruthless improvisation of war. He believed in order, in the civilizing power of Rome's law, and it would soon be his undoing. At his side rode a man who embodied the very bridge between two worlds, Arminius. Born among the Germanic tribes, raised as a hostage in Rome, trained in their military, fluent in their language, and knighted as a Roman citizen. To Varus, Arminius was the perfect ally, loyal, cultured, and bound by Roman honor. But beneath that polished exterior burned another loyalty, one that no oath to Rome could erase. Arminius had returned to his homeland not to serve Rome, but to destroy it. Even before the betrayal began, warnings were whispered. Among them came from Segestes, a noble and chieftain, and Arminius's own father-in-law. He warned Varus plainly, "Arrest him. Do not trust him." But Varus, blinded by faith in Roman superiority and the illusion of control, dismissed the warning as petty family rivalry. It was the last chance he would ever have to turn back. The legions pressed onward into the shadowed forests. Days of steady marching turned into weeks. The skies darkened. The rain came, first a drizzle, then a ceaseless downpour. The paths turned to rivers of mud, wheels sank, hooves slipped, and the endless line of wagons crawled forward inch by inch. The dense canopy swallowed the daylight, and the soldiers began to feel the weight of the forest pressing in. Women, children, and camp followers struggled through the mire. The column stretched for miles, too long to see itself from end to end, a serpent of armor and timber winding deeper into a land that seemed to resist their very presence. Then, at the height of exhaustion, Arminius rode up to Varus. With practiced calm, he asked permission to leave, claiming he needed to summon reinforcements from nearby allied tribes. Varus agreed without hesitation. Arminius saluted, rode off with a small escort, and disappeared into the trees. He would not return as an ally. Behind him, he left a few German guides to lead the Romans further into the forest, men loyal not to Varus, but to Arminius. They steered the legions deeper and deeper into terrain chosen with surgical precision for their destruction. The forest grew denser. The rain fell harder. Even the sound of marching boots and creaking carts began to fade, replaced by an uneasy silence. In that silence, among dripping leaves and low clouds, a feeling began to spread, a realization that something unseen was watching them. The Roman soldiers, hardened veterans of campaigns across the empire, felt the unease settle in their bones. Their armor clanked dully in the wet air. The torches sputtered and died. Somewhere in the distance, a raven cried, the only voice in a forest holding its breath. They didn't know it yet, but the forest was waiting for them. The first strike came without warning. Out of the trees, from ridges and thickets invisible moments before, German warriors erupted. They came screaming from the fog, hurling javelins, sling stones, and volleys of arrows down upon the marching column. The rain of death fell before the Romans could form ranks. Trumpets blared. Centurions shouted orders. But the narrow paths, the sucking mud, and the weight of the wagons left no room to maneuver. Roman discipline, their greatest strength, was shattered by the chaos of the woods. Formations collapsed, shields tangled, soldiers stumbled over carts and corpses alike. The rain turned crimson in the mud. Varus tried to regain control, calling for the men to form defensive positions. As night fell, the shattered remnants hacked at wet timber to build a makeshift camp, a palisade of desperation under the hammering rain. But the weather showed no mercy. The fires sputtered out, and the wounded cried through the night. Somewhere beyond the treeline, the Germans shouted in the darkness, not in fear, but in triumph. At dawn, the storm still raged. What had once been Rome's precision machine was now a scattered host of cold, hungry, and terrified men. Armor rusted under the rain. Bowstrings snapped from the damp. The long baggage train, once a symbol of Roman organization, had become a chain of death, clogged with corpses, overturned carts, and dying horses. Varus ordered the march to continue. He could not know that each mile led them deeper into the trap Arminius had so carefully prepared. Ahead, cavalry detachments were sent to scout the road. None returned. They rode straight into barricades, walls of felled trees and sharpened stakes manned by warriors who vanished as quickly as they appeared. Ambush followed ambush, every movement watched from the shadows. The legions moved slower now, their line thinning, discipline eroding with each attack. By the second day, the rain had turned the ground into a swamp. Shields slipped from numb hands, soldiers fell and did not rise again. Wounded men were left behind. To move faster, the army abandoned wagons, siege gear, even their precious standards. Yet still, the enemy pressed them. Every hill, every hollow was alive with Germanic war cries. Arminius's coalition, once scattered tribes divided by blood feuds, now fought as one under his command. He struck, vanished, and struck again, carving the Roman column apart piece by piece. As the third day dawned, even the illusion of order had vanished. Legionaries stumbled in small groups, fighting not for Rome, but for survival. Rain and fog blurred friend from foe. Arrows hissed through the mist, spears flashed between trees. The forest devoured sound, turning battle into confusion. Those who tried to flee found no refuge. The forest had no end, only more mud, more trees, and the unseen eyes of enemies closing in. Roman discipline, that proud backbone of empire, snapped under the weight of panic. Cohorts that had marched side by side for years now scattered, each man alone. The Germans emerged from hidden trenches and ridges, overwhelming isolated groups before they could rally. Some Roman officers tried to reform lines. Trumpets sounded weakly through the storm. The calls were drowned in the screams of dying men. Standard bearers fell where they stood. The eagles of Rome, the sacred symbols of the legions, were torn from their poles and trampled into the mud. Each fallen eagle was more than a defeat, it was a wound to Rome's very soul. At the rear of the collapsing army, Varus realized the truth: there would be no escape. His officers were dead or deserting. His supposed allies had vanished into the woods. Arminius himself was somewhere out there, the student turned executioner. When the final line broke, Varus made the only choice left to a Roman commander facing total ruin. He fell upon his sword. Ancient accounts say his head was taken as a trophy, carried before the tribes as proof that even Rome could bleed. The legions died with him. Few survivors ever reached the Rhine. Most were hunted down in the days that followed, cut apart in the marshes, or sacrificed to the gods of the forest. The sounds of dying men echoed through the trees long after the battle had ended. Years later, when the forest was finally searched, archaeologists would uncover its silent testimony: skulls split by blades, bones scattered among rusted weapons, armor twisted and torn apart. Fragments of Larica segmenata, broken helmets, and the skeletal remains of horses lay where they had fallen, preserved in the soil of Caugries. Each fragment told the same story, the annihilation of an entire army. For the Roman Empire, the news arrived like a thunderclap. Messengers stumbled back across the Rhine carrying tales of destruction so total that even the emperor refused to believe it at first. But when the truth became undeniable, grief turned to rage. In Rome, Emperor Augustus is said to have torn his robes and cried out in anguish. Quintili ver, legions red. Quinctilius Varus, give me back my legions. The cry echoed through the marble halls, not just the grief of a ruler, but the shock of an empire confronted with its own limits. The defeat in the Teutoburg Forest was more than a military disaster. It was a fracture in Rome's illusion of invincibility. 3 entire legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, were erased from existence. Their numbers were struck from all future records, never again to be used by any Roman army. Rome's borders contracted. The dream of conquering Germania vanished overnight. From that moment on, the Rhine River became not a bridge to new lands, but a wall, the northern boundary of the empire. For 400 years, it would stand as Rome's edge, a silent memorial to the soldiers who vanished in the forest. In time, Arminius was celebrated among his people as the liberator of Germania, though even his victory brought no lasting unity. The tribes soon turned against one another, as they always had. Arminius himself would be betrayed and murdered by his own kin a few years later, but his legend endured. To the Romans, his name became synonymous with treachery. To the Germans, it became a symbol of freedom. And in the quiet forests of northern Europe, where the wind still moves through the tall oaks and moss-covered ground, traces of that ancient battle remain. Farmers still unearth shards of iron, spearheads, coins, and nails from the wagons of the fallen legions. The earth, even after 2,000 years, refuses to forget. The forest keeps its dead,